G'day crew, welcome to GOAT Fantasy. It's the Are Players Resting edition. GOAT Fantasy brought to you by checkmyrates.au. Visit the website, it's free to use. Take control of your financial future. Brandon and the team will help you get a better home loan rate. Just mentioned GOAT Fantasy, the podcast hosted by Drew Jones. Nice to be with you. Gee whiz, it's been quite a week. Quite a lot going on at the moment. So from an outside fantasy world perspective, stuff that's gone on with the Sydney Swans has obviously been incredibly regrettable. But when we put everything to the side and the investigation ongoing with Victorian Police, this does have a football aspect, a football element, and it is impacting the last week of fantasy football. So we're going to talk about it from that perspective. And quite clearly there's a lot to play out from a legal side of things and for everyone involved in what happened in the early hours of Monday morning. As of today, the Swans have stood down those 5 players from appearing for the rest of the season. And from a fantasy football perspective, Isaac Heaney, Chad Warner and certainly Nick Blakey, and probably Riley Bias to a lesser extent in draft leagues, are relevant to what is going on this weekend. We already have Harry Sheezel, who's been ruled out after breaking his cheekbone. He's having surgery next week. One of the best and most popular players in fantasy out for the last game of the season. For those that had him last week in draft, you may well have lost your matchup because of the fact that he only scored 51 as one of your premium players. Maybe you had him as captain. It's a difficult situation to navigate if you've made it through to the next round despite the Sheezel injury. Well done. And you've got a bit of work to do to find someone who can replace him in your squad. Horn Francis has been ruled out with a toe injury, which is a blow to a lot. Very popular forward, particularly in Supercoach, but certainly in fantasy. And then, of course, in draft, he would have been one of your best forwards. So we're trying to navigate through what has already been a sort of tough start to the week. We're not sure if Bontempelli will play after he missed last week. And then we're a bit sort of worried about what's to come in terms of restings ahead of the last round of the season. And we're going to get to all that in a moment. There's a bit to get through here when it comes to player availability, who to bring in, who's a safe pick, who can really take advantage in the last game of the season. How can we use these matchups in our favour? Just in terms of Thursday night football, so the Saints have made 2 changes. Dougal Howard comes back for his last game of AFL footy. He's retiring. Liam Ryan is also back for the Saints. Jack Higgins is injured and misses out. Alex Taru, the Flying Viking, has been omitted. And then from a Gold Coast perspective, so Nick Holman is back. He was also going to play a farewell game. Jared Witts is back in. And Ben Jepson comes into the side. Sam Collins is out injured again, as is Will Powell. And Christian Petrarca supposedly has a foot concern, plantar fasciitis. So he misses out as well, another popular player from a fantasy perspective. So I just wanted to clear that commitment off the top. So as we know, Harry Sheezel is out. So from a fantasy perspective, what is a forward that we're going to be trading into? Some teams will have also lost Chad Warner. So 2 forwards. So Max Hall, if you didn't do it last week, I think he's a natural player to look to this week in a dead rubber Thursday night football at Marvel Stadium. You'd think another score potentially beckoning for him. They scored 2,000 fantasy points last week, and they dominated from a Supercoach perspective. If you like the look of Max Hall, and you've got trades left. So I think that's a pretty safe way to go. And then Brad Hill, if you don't have him already, I think this is your opportunity to get him into your team. He's had an excellent last 5 or 6 weeks, averaging 110 plus. He was on 100 at halftime in fantasy last week before the Tigers put a bit of attention into him. But he's going to have that halfback role again. He's going to have a lot of ball in hand. And that, from a fantasy perspective, is what we want. And then, in terms of forwards, Sean Manor is someone who, if you're trying to save a bit of cash, if that's what you need to do in order to get the other player that you want at the other end of it. I think he'd be a nice buy ahead of that Richmond matchup. We're not quite sure whether Geelong would consider resting players, but I don't think Sean Manor is on that list. So I really like the look of him as a forward play. We know Heaney is out. So if you don't have Baslenka, this is the time. Richmond matchup to come. It could be really large. And I think Errol Goulden, given the absentees now from the Swans squad, he'd been scoring well anyway, but it feels like a fair amount of responsibility for him to shoulder without them. It's going to be a pretty testing afternoon for the Swans, but we know that Goulden, such a consistent performer, his output has been immense since he's come back from injury, so we like him as an in. Now, if you've lost Heaney in draft and you need a midfielder to stream this week, what about Angus Sheldrick, who's likely to come back in and play through the midfield, you would think, for the Swans? McInerney hurt his hamstring, so he's out for a bit longer. Even when Rowbottom went out of the team, I don't think they necessarily brought Sheldrick in. So Angus Sheldrick, throwing him out as an option, as a streamer in your midfield this week with the Swans missing a lot of players. They'll need a distributor of half back. Not sure exactly where those points are going to fall. You might see Harry Cunningham come into the side. Not sure if he'd be one that would make your defence in draft. But there's a few things to consider on this front. So Jason Horne-Francis goes out. This is good for Joe Richards as a forward option for Port Adelaide. If you want to bring him in, soft matchup against Essendon. I think Jace Burgoyne as well. Butters, we're not sure whether he's going to play. He's a test, but probably unlikely. So Burgoyne and Richards, you'd think, big minutes in the midfield this week. From a forward line perspective, I think the other name we didn't mention was Isaac Rankin, but his form has been absolutely outstanding. They've got GWS in a must-win game, so you'd think all chips are in for the Crows this weekend. Just from a Pies perspective, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. You know, guys like McStay, Houston, Josh Dacos, Nick Dacos, Darcy Cameron. A few of those guys have played every game this season. Nick's missed at least one, maybe two. Nick's probably got the Brownlow wrapped up. Got the sense from Craig McRae today that it didn't sound like Nick was that keen to rest, but perhaps that gets taken out of his hands. Josh Dacos is over that ankle concern. Theoretically, Josh could probably benefit from a rest. Again, I don't know if they'll go that way. Maybe they don't want to tinker with their form because they have been really good since the bye. But Josh Dacos and Nick Dacos would really hurt us if they missed pretty highly owned players. Darcy Cameron as well in the ruck would be a real blow across the board. Cameron sort of seems like a guy they could consider resting. They do have a ruckman who they brought in through the mid-season draft. Perhaps they could roll out. But of course, the ruck division really has been held together by Cameron since they lost their young guy, Steen, to that knee injury. Wonder what Fremantle will do as far as resting goes. They have sort of systematically left guys out here and there. Doesn't sound like Murphy Reid will play. Maybe not Alex Pearce. Sarong has been immense in recent weeks. Could they give him a rest? Andrew Brayshaw's had a big season. You know, there's a lot of questions to answer. We don't quite know, but Luke Jackson would probably be the fantasy concern as far as a rest would go. Sean Darcy is a test after pulling up sore from his game in the Waffle, but there's no reason why they couldn't give Mason Cox a full game in the ruck. But will the Dockers do something? Is it time Jackson has a rest? You know, that's one to consider this weekend for Fremantle. Just at the Pies, so McCreery had a really big game on the weekend. If they were to rest players, he might be a streaming option. I think McStay's been a good streamer in recent times. He's averaging, you know, towards the 80 to 90, 100 mark over the last 4 or 5 weeks. And certainly if Darcy Cameron doesn't play and McStay does, that probably boosts his ruck stocks even further. If you were to lose Darcy Cameron or Luke Jackson and you're looking for a trade, Lloyd Meek might be one you might think about. He's got the West Coast matchup against Bailey Williams. Solo rucked the last couple of weeks and has been really good. Grundy and Sherry playing against each other sort of feels like a risky one to trade into, even though they are probably better options than Meek. I think the Hawks ruckman might have the slightly better matchup against Bailey Williams. So, rests are on the cards. Bontempelli, Ed Richards. There's a few guys at the Dogs. They might think about resting, particularly if that game is a dead rubber. Ed Richards is coming off the highest rated Bulldogs game in history. So you'd be a bit flat for Ed if he got rested this week in such good form. Bontempelli, if Carlton lose, or if that game becomes a dead rubber, then perhaps that will dictate what they do with Bontempelli in the game against the Demons. But it's a massive game for Melbourne, so they won't be resting anyone. But certainly the Dogs, there's a bit to play out there as to what they do, as there are with a few teams over the weekend. So we're watching the teams drop very closely come Thursday night. We'll have a preview for you with Warney on Friday, as always. I guess that'll be the last one of the season. It's kind of crept up on me a little bit, probably because there's a lot going on. But good luck in your grand finals. We'll chat before then anyway. It's been a funny week. Wildcard round looked good on paper, but perhaps not so much for fantasy coaches. So do your best. Try and fill out that team. Think about all possible options, because there is going to be probably more carnage to come. So get those waiver requests in for those draft teams, and hopefully we can cobble together, a reasonable 22 or 23 for your salary cap sides ahead of the weekend. All right, Goat Fantasy out. We'll chat soon.